Alex, welcome to the Shift Podcast.
Well, thank you for having me. This is lovely.
I know it's been a long time coming. We've met, I think, via LinkedIn. No, somebody connected us. That's right. Somebody connected
Yes.
us. It's the power of networking, right? And meeting amazing individuals. And we've had a couple of different conversations. And then we're like, we have to have a chat on this podcast and just talk about the work that you're doing because it's very similar to kind of what my audience is interested in. It's all, just just how do we become better leaders? How do we manage this world of work and with everything that's happening? So I'm excited to dive into that, but give my audience a little bit of a snapshot about kind of why should they spend the next 30 minutes or so into this conversation. What's your background, where you come from, and then what are you doing today to help people elevate their careers?
Excellent. Well, that's a big, broad question. So, why? I think I like to say that I meet clients at the intersection of need and novelty. And that's a little different than what service providers do. And here's what I mean. The need needs to be identified. What are people working on? What is the group issue? What's the individual issue? And not just the surface symptom, but what's going on underneath. And the novelty part is, um, if you see behind me, it says joy. There tends to be a playful way that I approach things. I'm an experiential educator. So, yes, I like the theory that stands behind, but I prefer getting hands on and actually doing the thing and then reflecting on that. So, there's a playful way, there's a novel way. And the reason that's important to me, anyway, it's fun, but it lights up the brain in different ways than if I talk at you. So yes, that part's needed, but then let's get up and let's move around. So meeting at the intersection of need and novelty is kind of a quest I have to be a little different and engage. Then when you get curiosity, folks lean in more.
Mm. You know what's interesting? I'm actually reading a book. It's called The Anxious Generation. And it's around, I don't know if you've heard about it, but it talks about kids and how adolescents in particular, like teenage, and how social media is impacting their mental health and et cetera, but also how we moved away from being in a play mode as humans, like when we're, especially for kids in general, right? Like when they're growing up before, it used to be like, we would play as kids. And now it's like this device, I forget the term, gosh, I forget the term the author used, but it's basically like play-based versus like I don't know, online presence based or something. I forget. I'm so sorry to the writer. I'm
We'll look it up.
butchering it. I'm butchering it. But basically, what we're saying is that we're moving away from this play, this interactive, this human to human, this where it's engaging different parts of the brain, as you're saying, right? And it's
Oh,
and not only is this happening in kids, but you're absolutely right. It's the same thing in the workplace and the corporate. It's like we're just so stuck on like just doing, I don't know, things very in a very serious way. And we think play is just something that is, it's like it's not as serious, but we see so much with like Lego play and other engagement tools out there where actually it brings a lot of benefit to the corporate world. So anyway, but that book came to mind because it was literally they were literally just talking about like that piece, the play-based. So what have you seen in terms of like but before we even go into that, like tell me a little bit more, like how did you get into this? And because in leadership development and coaching, there's just so many avenues that you can kind of get into. So, what did you, because you spent a number of years in corporate, so take me back just a little bit before we go into the kind of the grit of what you're doing.
so the way back, I fell into this industry and I didn't even know. So I think when we were talking before, we had a similar, I was a resident assistant in college just to help pay my way through.
Mhm.
And because of that, we had to do training for the people coming behind us. There was team building. There was an outward bound week-long experience as a staff out in the woods on the river, the Potomac River in Maryland. And so that was a means to an end, but it also started my education in group work and understanding how groups work together. I went on to get a master's right after college in human resources development. So it brought some structure to that which was happening. And I never fell out of it. I was in a culinary school, I was in manufacturing floors, I did lean manufacturing on the office side back when that was just emerging. And the longest stint was 20 years in a financial institution, bringing, developing leaders from the classroom all the way up to strategy and supporting the human side of business. So I never fell out of it. It was always been engaging and interesting and fulfilling. And so presto changeo, a long career in developing leaders.
Mhm. Yeah, that's helpful. And so talk to me a little bit more about kind of who is, what kind of challenges, I guess, people, organizations come to you with. And give me like, do you have any stories of, maybe things that you have seen that really work in those situations? Like if you have some examples of that.
Talking with other, so you get the meta research. So other practitioners, we're finding that, um, and the work I'm doing has a lot to do with communication. How
Mhm.
can we think better together? And I know that sounds crazy because think happens in the brain, but then when we start working on a team or developing as a team, solving problems with one another, how we communicate can be efficient, effective, or not, and that's a large part of my work right now. Um, Watching how we behave verbally with each other. So communication is, we haven't ironed it out as a society. We still have some ways to go. It's an ever learning edge. Um, Trust is um, ebbing and flowing. Return to the office, changes in the size of a group, right? We're growing, we're shrinking. That continual need to build the, are we okay? Am I okay with you?
Mm-hmm.
Continually building that. Um, and a lot, I feel like there's an awakening. I'd love your opinion on this. I feel like there's an awakening between being a human
Mm-hmm.
and being in the workforce. And we've done it for a while, right? Like strength finders came out what, in the tens, and oh, these are strengths in their brain base, but we're bridging the gap on the impact of how our brains work in leadership. I've got this phrase I've been using. Our brains are exquisitely designed to keep us alive, to survive.
Mm-hmm.
And if we're not careful, they will stop us cold from thriving. It
Mm-hmm.
won't, right? Like it's all in safety. And if we're not aware of that, then we won't take the risk. We won't do the new job. We won't open our mouths when we see something that's wrong. So there's a lot of brain work
Mm-hmm.
emerging in the application of leadership.
Mm.
I don't, are you seeing something like that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think with the world of work and my audience knows, like, I mean, maybe I'm just at a nausea of how much I talk about this stuff, but I feel like we're so caught up in like doing that we forgot the basics of what it takes to be human, what it takes to be a high performing human, just like the human being in us. And I definitely see that, and I think this is where your point on trust and communication and insecurities people feel in the world, and with all the changes and AI coming in, all those things, I mean, threatening a lot of jobs ultimately. Like, yeah, sure, people like, well, it's just going to make you more productive at work. Sure, if you know how to use AI in a productive way, if you know how to utilize it to that advantage, but it's like 30% of companies today, at least 30% of leaders and organizations say they're doing anything with AI. So there's a whole lot of organizations that are not even thinking about it. And again, just going back to being human, I think all of that, to your point, is to our brain, it's a threat. So we're continuously threatened, we're not realizing it. So
Mm.
subconsciously we're registering all this information that's going around us, and then it comes out as, lack of performance or lack of productivity or, insecurities and all those things. And that's because we're being threatened, but we don't realize it.
Yes.
You know what I'm
Yes.
saying? And then the reactive part of us is actually, the I don't even know what I'm trying to say, but like the what's the word? The deeper reason for this is our brains trying to protect us and we feel
Mhm.
threatened. But it comes out as conflict at work, lack of communication, lack of productivity, and those other things.
Mhm.
So no, I think you're spot on that.
Mhm. I'm noticing. I just was reading or watching some podcasts on the connection between that internal stress, right? There's something happening to ADHD and addiction. So when we're threatened, um, it takes resources to hold that, to keep scanning the environment, and it looks distracted. And so
Mm-hmm.
you do that long enough, you have habits of being distracted. So there's a, don't even get me started. When we're like, gosh, I can't even think at work. That's right. Because we haven't calmed. We haven't gotten grounded in the meeting we're about to have. What's actually happening? What is actually at stake? Who actually has to be here?
Yeah.
We're on autopilot. And so it can show up as wonky meetings,
Mm.
and wonky is a technical term.
So let's dive into a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about managers because I think that's the biggest challenge we have. Like one of the biggest challenges we have in organizations is that managers are, expected to manage more people with less resources oftentimes, and nobody's really taking care about managers in most organizations. I think that there was a study, I forget who, maybe Gardner, or maybe Gardner, maybe Gallup that did it. But they're saying that we have to managers have to oversee three times more people today than they did in 2017, 2018. So, 6 years later, 7 years later, three times more people per manager than before. So but the work is more still. So there's like, it's not like it's, same amount of work and we just get to have more people. No, it's like more work, more people. A lot of times those people are still not enough to do the amount of work that's coming in. And that's putting a lot of pressure on the managers. And your point about communication, I think another report, and this was by Gallup, they were saying that when they interviewed managers and then employee like direct reports, and they were trying to figure out like what matters in an organization for those employees, and managers are like, well, the manager needs to be likable. Like I need to be likable as a manager, and I need to kind of be supportive and so on. And the employees responded and said, actually, the results that came out was employees want more communication, more constructive and impactful feedback, more one-on-one time with their managers, and them helping them not just provide resources, but also remove obstacles that stop employees from doing the jobs that they need to do. And it could be, I don't know, it could be, again, lack of resources. It could be a political politics, essentially, right? And those sort of things. So it's interesting because there's obviously a disconnect between what managers think their employees want and what employees want. And the final point I'll make here is that what they want is just that pure basic communication. I want to be able to talk to my manager and I want effective feedback. I want, whether it's good or bad, I want feedback that can help me grow. So, any thoughts about on that? And also
Mm.
just kind of like in the work that you do, like what are some practical ways managers can start implementing some of that?
So good. I have a very soft spot in my heart for managers because of what they have to hold, right? Deliver on the greatest initiatives for the company, get the work done. And then individuals who have a host of struggles on their own, right? So trying to corral and bring together those two. I used to call it the stretch Armstrong, so a toy from like the 70s and 80s, right? This doll that you would stretch, holding together these pieces. Um, in hearing your description, I'm come back to trust actually first. And so a friend of mine developed a called the Hart Pence trust model, and the elements in it are um, credible, reliable relationship where folks feel safe, value, and heard. And I heard those elements that in your description. And you look across them, all the models, she's notes that you don't need all of them. And we know when we break one, we're all set back. But managers have the ability to look at a scenario and pull a lever that makes sense. Do I need relationship here? No. Do I need um, safe value and heard? Huge, huge. If folks know what they're asking for feedback, that happens in the container of feeling safe, value, and heard. So feedback, how am I doing, is a huge open conversation, right? Like, you need to be seeing what's doing well and what's at stake. So a manager can use these five like checklist. Have I built trust? And we say that as this big bucket, but really, am I showing up in a credible way, in a reliable way to my direct reports? Have I built some form of a relationship? I'm not talking about bringing your best friend to work, though that's great. I'm saying, do you know a little bit about, is there some collateral there? And behave in ways that build up that psychological safety. Um, Hearing folks, sometimes managers can't give information. They can't give the real,
Mm.
um, think of layoffs. They can't share corporate information until it's time. This is a very big pressure for them. What they can say is, it is a really uncertain time. I understand this. And it's painful, but we're going to get through this together. But
Hmm.
however, it makes sense to share. So that those levers, those six levers, are discrete things managers can play with to build the relationship, to gain the engagement that they need from their teams.
Mm.
Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, and I like that. And honestly, when it comes to like sharing or not being able to share certain information, I think just transparency is key and being honest. And I think what we've haven't done well in the last few years, and I mean, in general, like in companies that I see, is we are. I think there's more than we can share, and I think just even letting
Mhm.
people understand that at the end of the day, I think maybe it's not the manager's job, but I think just as employees, and no matter what level you are, what rank you are, I think you need to understand that you are working for a company and you are there to do one of three things usually. You are there to either cut costs, help companies save money, right? Either to increase their revenue, so whatever job task you're doing, you're there because you're bringing in, whether it's work for the client, you're somehow contributing to increase in the revenue, right? Um, and the third one is, oh my gosh, it slipped my mind. So cutting costs, oh yeah, minimizing risk in general, right? So if you should be doing it no matter what kind of level you are, you should understand like what is your role, and if you don't, that's a good question to ask your manager, like what is your role and how is your role contributing to X, Y, and Z? Because if you understand that, and then let's say, I don't know, a company loses a client or a contract, or AI is coming in and you realize that those things are going to impact your job,
Mm.
then you'll be more aware. And I think that's where we can be a little bit more honest with our, not honest, but just be transparent with our team members, is understand exactly what you as a team member is contributing so that you understand where your value is,
Mm.
because unless you're like even like overhead staff, like it's the same thing, you either bring in value or you're not. And I think we've gotten to a point, I see this a lot with Gen Z's and people getting upset, or like layoffs, like the like Meta recently announced that they're going to cut I think 5% of their workforce, which is a few thousand people, and people like, oh, they're kind of demonizing these companies. And I'm like, if you look at it, what they're saying is they're going to eliminate the low performers. And
Mm.
that's just the reality. I'm sorry to break it to people, but if you're a low performer, company's not supposed to be paying you. If you're a business owner, like I'm just thinking like, okay, let's say as a business owner, I want to, give a job to somebody. If you're not producing for me, if you're not touching these three things, producing, decreasing risk of something bad happening, increasing value, or cutting costs, like why would I be paying you? So, and I think
Mm.
this is where I think the education piece, where managers and leaders can really educate the most of the workforce. I think that allows for transparency and a little bit more of understanding how things work.
Mhm. So understanding the business of the business that they're
Exactly.
delivering on.
Yep.
Mhm. Yes, I can see that for sure. As one of the main in the spectrum of duties that a manager holds, right? So there's that
Yeah.
Stretch Armstrong, and then putting it in such a way that people can absorb it. It's that novelty, that need and novelty.
Yeah.
Putting those initiatives, that imperatives, the bottom line of it all in what they're doing, and keeping the human side. Um, I want
Mm.
to add to your
Yeah.
my answer of the question. So that when you asked about communication, I actually went to that trust model first as what we might do. But now let's look at how we might say it. And this other model, this other tool I'm working with has been astounding. It's about this, it's called Airtime BA, and where we map behaviors. Right now, I'm doing a lot of giving information. Necessary to explain, but at too much, it's boring.
Hmm.
One of the least observed behaviors that we see is giving feelings. And it's so critical in EQ, in engaging another person, in being authentic. It sounds like I am really concerned with how we're operating as a team. So it's the ownership of the feeling. And I offer that up because a manager could fall into that business side because that's the easiest to talk about. It's the easiest to map. It's the easiest to to track. It comes down on high.
Mm-hmm.
And in that tension between what the company wants and getting it from other folk and getting it delivered from other, from the directs, these 18 behaviors that we watch, there are a few that are critical in that engagement, in like giving feelings, so that you can be transparent and you can give more information. You can give the information that you need to. So we can talk about that more, but that was one thing that, as we look at effective conversations, how we do that, both as trust is necessary and these behaviors coming off of autopilot,
Mm-hmm.
so that the hard conversations, the bottom line conversations can translate and still in a way that folks feel safe, valued, and heard.
Hmm. I'm curious from your side. I think one of the other things, like as I mentioned that report, like managers are sometimes unaware of whether they're actually a good manager or like impactful manager or not. Are there symptoms that a manager can see in their teams or
Mm.
maybe in the work that they do that might say, I need some improvement as a manager? Like other symptoms on the team that stand out that might point to, are you being a good manager or not so
Mm.
much?
So what are
Or
the
an
tells?
impactful. Yeah, like tells. Yeah, like other symptoms.
Oh, that's a great question because I hear it focused on looking out when really I want to point everything to looking in. Meaning, I think the number one best attribute of any manager leader is self-awareness. And it flies in the face of what we talked about earlier about our brains being wired to survive.
Yeah.
Self-awareness dings that. Like, what? I'm not the best. What? I'm not flawless.
That
You
ego
know,
comes out real quick.
it's protection. So
Yeah.
it's really hard. So when we say, "Oh, isn't self-awareness great?" Yes, and I as a human will tell you it's also very hard. You can't be in this line of work that we have and not do your own work. And it's hard. It flies in the face of what feels good. So the first piece a manager to look at is their themselves and their reaction to whatever. So do they say, they're crazy? I don't know why. I don't know why they're doing this. I have done everything I could. And switching that around to say, what's happening? What might they need? And that's where you got to bring the other person in. What do you need? I am trying this and not getting a result. What do you need? What could I be doing differently? Um, and it's humbling and hard. So I would say look for your own, as a manager, look for your own reactions and play there. What's irritating you the most? What are you stumped? What are you so surprised that
Yeah.
something's not happening the way you expected it?
hmm
Look there. Um, because there are these levers of whether it's trust or communication or building rapport among, people having conflict. There's the answer is there, and the tells are actually inside. The tells are the things that make you grit your jaw and rant to your friend, right? Like, I can't believe they said that. Or,
Yeah.
okay, that's a tell. So tune in to your own reactions first,
Mm.
and then ask questions about that to uncover what is actually happening. What's my role in it? Huge question.
Mm. I like that. And I think that's tough though, like that self-awareness piece. That's the toughest. I went most of my 20s, probably early into my 30s, completely unaware
Didn't we
of
all?
I'm so sorry to anybody who's known me in those years and like no, I really like it's crazy. Like I was such a hot mess. Just completely complete ignorance and lack of self-awareness and so on it's just phenomenal like the who I was in my 20s, but I think it's all part of growth, I guess, or that's the excuse I give myself at least to make myself
It
slightly feel better.
is.
But
It's permission. That's right. And
yeah.
there's a whole generation sitting right there right now.
Yeah. But some of them are a little bit more self-aware than I was. So like kudos to them. But also, I think, and I don't want to get too much into this generation, but I think what's lacking, if anything, is the reality of how life works. And it's not meant to be pessimistic at all, but I recently posted on LinkedIn and I was like, I interview a lot of kind of early career professionals, and there's this almost expectation that things should be like that they should get X, Y, and Z, and expectation that jobs are going to come to them, expectations that they should be giving everything on this, like all the things on like a golden platter, and expectations of like, this balance and all of that. And I'm like, that's not what your 20s are for. And even just in general, like nobody's coming to save you. Nobody owes you anything. You know what I mean? And it's not meant to be negative. It's just like if you're able to manage that expectation of the world, then you might be much happier. Because unhappy, like not being happy is because your reality doesn't meet your expectations. And I think that's the issue with a lot of, just with a lot of people these days, is that they're expecting something more, and then they're not getting it, and then we go into these like depressive modes and all of those things. But it's like, it's just life, like you know what I mean. And maybe that's the Russian in me, because we're always operating on like 1 day basis and we grew up in chaos. But I don't know, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think you're connecting it to that manager experience, right? That self-awareness, and
Hmm.
that self-awareness is good for any age, any, the
Yeah.
wisest to the youngest. Um, and there's something about allowing for it and waiting. So those that lived that cycle, right? What a hot mess in the 20s.
Raise your hand.
Oh, I so know everything. Um, those that were older. So here's a great story, I think. I had this dear friend, and I was sharing with her that my manager in the 20s had shared with me that I wasn't so great with the details. And I was telling my friend, isn't that crazy? I am so good with details. I mean, I run everything, right? So this indignant space, right? And she took it. She's about 10 years my senior. And flash forward, oh gosh, years, easily 5 to 7. And I was doing a Myers-Briggs for a group, and it was doing it old school. So I had to count, it was manual. So I had to count an 84 questions and 4 types. So I had to count it 4 times, and I didn't trust myself. So I counted it all doubly. So if there were 10 people, I was doing a lot of counting, trying to catch my errors. And I shared with the same friend, gosh, I really have to work hard to make sure that my eye for detail doesn't provide, is accurate, because I miss things, and I don't want to give someone an incorrect report. And she says to me, so I wonder when it happened. And that question, I was like, what? What are you talking about? And she goes, well, I wonder when it happened. When did you realize that your eye for detail wasn't as strong as others? Because your manager some years ago said that and you didn't believe it, but you believe
Mhm.
it now. And I'm like, oh.
Yeah.
She held her wisdom and her tongue, and she waited. That's leadership, right? Wait, I wasn't ready to hear I was not great with details. I was on
Hmm.
my high horse. Life had happened enough where I'd learned it, and she was there in support of me,
Hmm.
not in not in and that's leadership.
Yeah.
That's managing people in a way that is so very hard. You have to do your own work first. So fun little
Yeah.
story about the trip off the high horse.
Yeah. I think it's actually very important what you mentioned, because I see a lot of leaders in general like make this mistake today. We're so afraid. We want to speed up the development of other people so fast, and because we need to get more out of them, which is partially like I get it. I think there's times to be a dictator in an organization, and then there's times to just let that time pass so the person can develop and so on. And I think there's and and it's very rare that you need to be in that dictator mode, like where you're
Yeah.
just like yeah, people just need to execute what
Hmm.
so on. Like we're not,
Crisis.
oh,
There's
yeah,
a
Christ,
crisis.
exactly, like we're not firefighters where everybody you know what I'm saying. So like everybody needs to know exactly what they're doing. They need direction. I think in a corporate world we can be a little bit more flexible with that. And I think this is where an opportunity for development misses. We're so, but again, it goes back to how we operate today. And like on as a society, as organizations, like the norm is now to just get things done. And if you're not getting things done, you're out of there. Which from a business perspective, I kind of get, but then also like there's a fine line between a low performer or somebody who just needs that time to develop. And you need to allow that space as a manager, and you need to learn how to be able to develop that person. And you're right, it doesn't start until you actually have that self-awareness and those skills, which again, like this is no shame to the managers, like they're just not being taught those skills. We're not talking about these things because you just get promoted because you've done a great job as an individual contributor. Now we decided we're going to give you 20 team members and good luck, and with no support or resources. But yeah, it's
I That is the
what's a good
biggest bait and
story?
switch of all. Isn't that the biggest bait and switch? Like
Yeah,
you're an individual contributor and you rock at maybe it's loan accounting in a bank or whatever the discrete skill is. And
yeah,
then they give you a manager job.
hmm,
Sometimes they say, well, just manage the people and do your day job, and that's terrible.
yeah,
Mix. Understand the need sometimes, but it's so very hard to both manage people and do the work. And and they say, well, we'll give you training when you get to be a manager. Oh my golly. Like
yeah.
that is not when
Yeah,
you need it.
it's pretty impressive how backwards we do certain things, but
Mm,
yeah,
can be.
but I don't know. I'm curious what's going to happen with all the different things. Do you have any predictions for the world of work for 2025, 2026? A lot of people are talking about obviously AI and all the things that's happening. What do you hear? Like, do leaders even think, like, do they care? Are they thinking about it? Are they threatened by it? Anything you hear from like some of the people you work with, is that not my gut feeling, maybe it's not even a topic that comes up unless you're in that 30% of leaders that actually do pay
Right.
attention to what's happening with AI.
I think so I'll go out on some of the things I've been thinking of. May not have articulated. It might be a bit bumpy. I think there's a lot unknown. There's a lot at stake, and it is not unique. It is for me. I've
Hmm.
not had AI. I've not had come back to the whole return to office. These things are unique for my paradigm. But you could look at every generation and even every 10 years, and there has been a major disruption. Y2K, who wasn't worried on Y2K if you were working then?
Yeah.
So I think we're back to the kind of the brain. We are getting messages that say things are not safe and things are disruptive and it's not known. Those are facts. It is disrupted, it is not known. And we're smart people. We can think our way through this, especially when we come together. So my hope is there are enough people that can stay calm and continue to navigate because 10 years from now we'll have a new set of disruption of some sort and we will figure that out as well. There's a lot, I think the complexity is magnified by how much we know about what's happening out in the world, right? So years ago, you knew what was happening in your town. Now you know your state. Now we know the world. I think there's more knowledge to be had. And that tells us that we actually don't have it all. And that feels uncertain. And so leaders being called to make, this is a trend peers are talking about, leaders are being called to make decisions when we don't have all the answers. And that very risky. And we have to make them move forward. So
Mm.
that tension between knowing enough and making a good decision is ever pulling. And that's probably that is a big trend right now. And I don't know that it's unique. I
Mm.
don't know. What do you think? Am I? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's unique. I think you're right. I think this is it's just something that happens throughout history, and I think if we understand it, I think it's we're not meant to stay stagnant. I think I welcome. I'm a person who like welcomes all the changes. So like slightly nervous, but I'm more excited about everything that's coming. So I don't think it's anything to be surprised or worried about. I think it's just what it is, and I think you just need to ride the wave and do what you need to do, whatever role you're in. And if you feel like your job might be obsolete, then do something about it. So I'm more of just like, take hardcore ownership of whatever you need to do as a professional, as a
Mhm.
business, as whatever it is. So I think, yeah, I think it's just one of those things that it's a mindset piece, and to your point, if
Mhm.
you understand that your brain is just threatened and that's your reaction is to, outsource the fear to, oh, it's the job market, oh, it's the AI, oh, it's etc. Versus maybe look at internally what is it that you can control in this
Mhm.
situation and calm your brain down in that way and realize
True.
that you have a lot more control than you think. And I think maybe that will calm things down, maybe internally, at least the chaos that
Hmm.
might be happening internally.
Yeah.
So,
And
yeah.
I don't want to um excuse or rather overlook. I do believe there's a cumulative pressure. So the people today, what we're dealing with, like the sandwich generation, the folks that have young kids and elderly parents.
Hmm.
I think so. I don't want to. What's the word? I don't want to
Downplay, maybe.
brush off. Yeah,
Yeah.
downplay or brush off the very real pressures that are happening.
Yeah.
And the more that we can take control of what we can control, understand how we have evolved to this moment, and understand that there has been brilliance and genius all along our spectrum of people.
Hmm.
Um, we don't, yeah, I believe that we will all be okay. And there's a pressure. Not everybody feels it. And in fact, some days of the week I don't. This is good as I sit back and look at things. But even my own work of staying calm and own work of understanding where I am in a stage of life, understanding the dimensions around me and what's my role.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, and I definitely don't want to downplay the challenges that people have. I'll borrow something from I had a guest on my podcast actually earlier this week, Jabari Young, and he said something that was really powerful. It was a good reminder. He said we need to focus. I forget the exact question, but he was basically talking about how it's important to focus on our interdependence, that we have become
Mm.
so individualistic as society, as humans, that we're just so worried about me that we forget the we. And understanding that nothing happens in silos, that we're not alone in our personal lives and our work lives. And I think the more we understand that it's we, and the more we understand to have that community, to have that support, and be the person of that support, be the person who gives, and so on, and just having that interdependence, because I think we went too much on the other spectrum of just complete independence, and we're not independent of each other as human beings. And I think just understanding that can make us all just a little bit maybe just better as a society. But it's been a beautiful conversation, Alex. Thank you. Before I ask you my last question, where can people find you? Where do you hang out at the most if somebody wants to reach out and just kind of have a question, or just book a session with you?
I would say LinkedIn is my platform of choice, and you can find me as Alexandra Alex Walker. Um, Email me, alex at leadershipexp.com. Um, did I answer it? So the
Yeah.
two platform and an email?
Yep, I
Hmm.
will include those in the show notes as well. And the last question I ask all of my guests: what is one question you wish people would ask themselves more often?
Given our conversation, the one that's coming up is, ooh, there's so many good questions. What's my role in this? Not to find blame, but to find accountability. What's my role? Is it to be protector? Is it to be the calmer? Is it to be the one bringing joy? Is it to be someone to hold a boundary, to help hold someone else's boundary? Like, so in these discrete moments, what's my role? What's to be done here
Mhm.
in service of the greater task? Maybe that's it. Ooh,
Beautiful.
I could change that weekly, but that's a good one for now.
We'll take that one. Thank you, Alex.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun. Thank you.